I'll turn your phone on. Okay, is it showing yet? Okay, it is 11 o'clock on the dot, and we are about to get started. I want to welcome everybody here to part 3 of Having the Hard Conversations, the pandemic of racism. My host doesn't look like my daughter. This is my husband, Reggie Baldwin. Aja will be on today, but she also has her own small business. So she is baking right now. Good morning, Kim.
Hey, what's going on?
Not much, not much. Thank you for joining. So I sent out a poll. I apologize for the grammatical error today, but it talks about qualified immunity and amendments. So do you know what qualified immunity is? Yes, Larnell, I will be calling on you to talk about this in probably more layman's terms. I've been reading a lot about it, but I think it coming from you as a former police officer, that would be helpful. And then the other question for those of you that are on Facebook, do you believe that we, and I said this particular group, can call for it should be call for a change to the amendment, or call for an amendment, I'm sorry, to the Constitution. So with that in mind, I want to go ahead and get started. So Larnell, can you just kind of give us an overview of what qualified immunity actually means?
Okay, I knew you were going to ask me that.
So you're prepared, right?
It's actually, what it is essentially, it gives government officials the how can I put this? Because again, I'm not an attorney. You know what? Let's come back to this. So, and I'll get the official definition, and we can get into it and everything. Because essentially, it's. I'll get the official definition to come back with a better statement on it, though.
Okay.
All right.
The way I understand it is that there really, in layman's terms, there really is nothing that we can do if the police brutalize us. There really is nothing that we can do. That's what I got. They're able to do things because they're police officers. That's pretty much what I got out of it. It's hard.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm just saying it'd be harder to prosecute them or bring them up on charges because they have the permission or the go ahead to do whatever they did.
So it has to do with government officials as well, but with the police specifically. And I'll give you an example that I read because that's what I was trying to, because I've been reading a lot about it, but it is breaking it down into layman's terms. A man shoots, he means to shoot a dog, right? Not a man, a police officer. He means to shoot a dog. This is actually a real case.
Correct.
But he accidentally shot a 10-year-old in the leg. Because there is no rule on the books that says, oops, if I meant to shoot a dog, but I shot a boy, when the family actually sued, they lost. Correct. Does that make sense? So because there's nothing on the books to say that this has never happened before, then he gets away with it. He or she, police officer, gets away with it.
So how I understood it too is it's more like if charges aren't brought against the officer for whatever the reason is, then they're immune to civil lawsuits. Is that what it is, right? So that's what the immunity is. So they don't get prosecuted, like the DA doesn't bring charges against them. So then if the family wants to then make it a civil case and bring a lawsuit, they cannot because that officer is immune. Is that right?
It's yes, because the official definition of qualified immunity: government officials performing discretionary functions are immune from civil suits unless the plaintiff shows that the official violated clearly established statutory or constitutional rights of which a reasonable person would have known. So it's like what Angela had said, and the case that Angela is talking about. the police were looking for somebody, and I forgot what state it was in, but they were chasing somebody, and they thought the person they were looking for ran into a yard or something where some kids were playing, and they told the kids to get on the ground. So I don't know if they told the kids to get on the ground for their safety, or the person was in the yard and actually saw them. But anyway, there was a dog in the yard also, and so the police officer shot at the dog twice, missed the dog, and hit a 10-year-old in the back of the knee, shooting this kid. And so they found through qualified immunity, he was acting within his duties. And again, so nothing happened to him. The family was did not get any restitution. They were not allowed to sue. And this went through the courts. So and I think this was just challenged, if I'm not mistaken, last week in the Supreme Court. But I think the Supreme Court refused to look at it. So this is something that's been around for a number of years, a long time. And even me as a police officer, I wasn't aware of it,
So with that, when we look at some of the cases that have happened, is that what has been helping to get people off?
Well, not necessarily. There was a case in, I want to say, Louisiana. 2 Black officers were trying to apprehend as a white man. I think his son was in the back seat, and they shot because I don't know if the man was trying to use the car as a weapon, but anyway, they ended up shooting the car and they killed the boy. Guess what happened to the officers? They're in jail. So again, it goes back to race. Qualified immunity works for some, and I don't think it's going to work for everybody across the board. So here we are again with race.
That's a good point.
And that's always a determining factor with everything that I read, everything that I know, from being on the job and everything, all of that stuff. Always, again, whatever I read, the bottom line, I can read about qualified immunity. I can read about this particular case, that particular case, or look at all these different cases. At the bottom line, I look and see what the race of everybody is involved in the incidents, the police officers, the victims, the perpetrators, whatever you want to call them. Always look and see, and then that puts it in a whole nother realm at that point. Just like Andre said with qualified immunity, and in that case, because we remember, and we've talked about it before, Officer Noor, Noor, the brother in Minnesota, and when he shot the lady and killed her, you look at that. As soon as I heard about that, I knew he was going to jail. It's a different standard that was set for him. The union didn't come to help out. His partner testified against him. There was all kind of negative stuff written about this man. He should have never been a cop. Stuff that you don't normally see if it's a white officer.
So with that, do we think that we can enact change? Because here's the thing, as I've been talking about it this week, I saw that, and I forgot he's a baseball player, but the MLB, the baseball players, I've been doing this, the baseball players, the NBA, some of the NBA players and some of the NFL players have actually started pushing for a policy change in relation to qualified immunity. They're trying to get rid of it, which is why when I sent the information out to you guys, it's like, is this something we can work on? Because I thought about, Destiny last week had sent the information about change.org. Is this something that we can push for and then get the word out to let the people in high places know that we want to get rid of us? Now, we are, yes, a small group, but we have an opportunity to make a huge change. I mean, just look at what's going on now. So is this something that you all would be interested in? Because as I shared, I'm all about solutions. I don't want to keep just talking, because that's what I'm seeing a lot of people talking, but no action. So is that something that you guys would like to work on?
I'm on board.
Oh, me too, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Can I say something else?
Wait, Patricia, go ahead, Patricia.
Okay, sorry. So when talking about qualified immunity, to me, it seems like it's almost like a secondary response or action that the people have. It's not the first response that we want. The first response that we want is charges brought against them. Like that's what should happen. So qualified immunity seems like it's almost just like the secondary, like, okay, well, the charges didn't get brought against them from the DA or whatever. So me as the mother of the child that got shot or whatever, I want a civil lawsuit. So I guess I don't know, going after qualified immunity, it's still not taking care of the main problem or the first problem, which charges should be brought against these officers for wrongdoing, period. Right?
Correct. They should at least be indicted.
I mean,
Very
I have a question too about qualified immunity. Just if that's something that we want to do, but I don't think that the people, to go back to TTK's first point, which is I don't think that the people like George Floyd's case or maybe Breonna Taylor's, I can see them doing that, but like George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery, all the other people, Eric Gardner, I don't think they can get qualified immunity for that. There's no way that would be even an argument. That's not something I would think their lawyer would try to pursue. So I think we have to come up with something, like how many cases is this actually being used upon, and how many cases is this like a defense? So that way we can be like, oh no, qualified immunity will be good because everybody's getting off on this. If everybody's not getting off on this, then it's not going to be helpful for us,
Point. That's a good point. That's a good point.
Correct. It shouldn't be impartial at all.
Absolutely.
But it is, and that's it goes back to race. The root of it all is race, y'all.
Mm-hmm.
That's the root of it. Like I said, black officers, they go to jail. White officers, they may or may not get indicted. They get administrative leave, desk duty. They still get to earn a check. The person that they killed, he's not. Where's the recompense? They're not able to come back. Once you're dead, you can't come back.
That's a good point. So then again, I guess I go back to, because that's helpful to me. So where do we start then? Because we can talk police reform, but then even in that, like I've been talking to Larnell, talking to just different people in terms of like, even just because there is a police union. So let me tell you where some of this stems from for me. So I actually watched the body cam of the officer that killed Rayshard Brooks. Regardless of how you feel about what he did, what he didn't do, I personally don't think he should have died for that, right? So I watched the body cam, and the first thing he did was he asked, from what you could see afterwards, is he asked for his rep. And it's like a lot of conversation, and it's like, and I heard one of the officers said, well, what happened? And he said, no, don't tell me right now. And I'm just kind of like, so what's really going on? So how can we correct, or how can we put something forth that will try to correct those issues? Going up against a police union, that's going to be a bear. So what can we do in the meantime?
I don't know. Are the hiring policies too lax? Is there a way that we can, somehow, whoever is in charge of oversight, is there a way that we can get them to act swiftly? Because again, these officers are racking up many complaints and still are able to keep their job. I can't, do what I want to do on my job and keep my job. I'll get fired, written up. Or, what I'm saying? There's a progressive action. I'm gone. I'll probably get 3 strikes. I'm out of there. Some of these officers have more than 10 complaints, and then they get the.
I have a question.
If they get caught.
If they get caught.
I have a question for Dad. Dad, quick question. How does every officer have to go through police academy to become an officer?
Yes.
Okay. And if you go through the police academy, how many years is that before you graduate?
It's months. It's
right.
months.
I was gonna say it's not years.
It's months.
Okay, so maybe that's a starting point. You have to go through a series of classes. Like I think be 4 years before I can get me a bachelor's degree to say I could do an entry level position.
Right.
It's crappy. But I had to go through 4 years of college just to get a degree to do an entry level position. I feel like maybe we should tack on some more years. Maybe you should take some classes. Maybe you should understand. Maybe you should have a diversity course. Like it has to be. Maybe it needs to be more intensive of a training period of academy before you can pass through the academy. Maybe that's something where we can start. You have to demand a year or 2 years before. Maybe it's like an associate's degree. 2 years. These are the classes you have to take. It's not just like a month. 3 months I'm out, in and out, or something like that.
Well, Reggie has something to say, and then I want to share something.
Well, I'm going to say this. Most of them, because I was in a union, I was a union rep before. Most of your unions are really strong, and so they and this particular one, the police, they have a lot of funding, so they're able to do a lot of things. I think that even what Destiny was saying about the training and extending the police academy, I don't think that that's really going to change the culture, because I think that's where the problem is. So you have to be willing to get in to change that. I think a lot of police have what we call a warriors of society mentality. So they come in there with that mentality when we really need to get them to change and have a protectors of the community mentality. So I think the whole structure needs to be changed. And it doesn't really matter if I'm trained the proper way and I go into a wrong environment where the environment is totally different. A lot of time people compromise their training, right, to adopt to that environment. So we need a whole environmental change. If we can get that change, and I think that changes in the community, it changes in the city. You know what I mean? I looked at one thing and I said to myself, now, they have a lot of funding and they can do a lot of things because of their money, but their money can't supersede our voting. So we have to look at what we're capable of doing. We have to, I believe, come in and change the whole, the culture, the police culture, so we can have a total reform, which would change everything else. Because like I said, it really doesn't matter how much training you have. If you train one way and you go into an environment that does something different, and they allow you to keep doing that, you're going to end up growing up in that environment. That's what you're going to adopt to, and then that's what you're going to end up doing.
I will say, State's Attorney Mike Neerum is going to be on around noon today. I did get an opportunity to speak with him this morning. And one of the things that we talked about, he shared, and I didn't even know, in Chicago, one of the things they're looking at is licensure of police officers. So basically, just like a person who's going to get their cosmetology, you have to have a license, right? Like for me, you have to have that. So having that same thing for police officers. So what do you think about that as a start?
Well, what does that look like?
Yeah, what is that process to obtaining the license?
You usually have continuing education classes with those too, right? Like I know nurses, teachers, stuff like that. They have like continuing education classes that they have to complete every 2 years to keep their license. Is it something like that?
Let's ask him when he gets on, because we talked about like what would happen if they don't follow. We didn't talk about like what that looks like. And maybe it's something that we as a community have to create. Like, what is it that we want to see?
Police,
well, the thing is, license. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. You said what is it we like to see? I would just like to, I mean, playing English, I would just like to see the police be accountable, be held accountable. That's it. I mean, you shouldn't have to have all these talks. It's pretty easy. It's pretty simple. How we do it, I don't know. But I mean, what we want is pretty cut and dry.
I think I agree with that. But I think
problem
what happened is that there's been the police in some areas have been allowed to do what they've been doing, just like what Reggie was saying. Like, you may train up a really good police officer, right? They may go to the police academy, have good intentions, I'm going to help my community. But if they get under somebody that's training them and says, well, no, we're going to cut corners, then that's where I think some of the issues might come. There also could be people that go into the police department with the wrong intention, just like we talked about last week. Well, I don't like so-and-so, so I'm going to use my power now to make that person's life hard. And also just knowing that, just in this short conversation, knowing that some people are, because you're Black, you're going to be treated as an officer, you would still be treated differently than a white officer.
Well, you were talking about, you said you talked to Mike about a license.
Mm-hmm.
Officers, you have to get post certified, and post is it's the police officers standards and training board. That's the board that oversees police officers in states. So if you lose your post certification, when you said license, that's what I'm thinking of, like the post certification. So if an officer loses that post certification, it's essentially taking away that bachelor's degree or that job certification, that union certification that you can go and work. So it's supposed to work that way, but I don't know if it goes state to state. Each state's post certification, if it's lifted, if that officer can go to another state, that's something to look in. But it shouldn't be that way, because if let's say if I'm a police officer in Illinois, I get into whatever I get into, I get fired and my post my post certification is taken away. I shouldn't be able to go to Wisconsin. But it sounds like it isn't, because if we remember this past week, what Trump was one of the things that I can't remember if he said yay or nay to it. It was presented to Trump was a national database.
Mm-hmm.
So it lends me to believe that post certifications do not travel from state to state, or they don't look at it. But what should alleviate that is, so Andre wants to be a police officer down here. So you come to wherever I am as a background investigator. So Andre has his application. Andre puts down all of his references, his past jobs, schooling, all of that stuff. My job as an investigator is to go back and contact all of these people. What is Andre like? Did Andre actually work here? Why did you leave? Talk to your employees. What kind of employee was Andre? Talk to classmates, talk to relatives, and then sit down with Andre and do an interview. So Andre, you said you worked at McDonald's when you were 20 years old till you were 23 and you went to school. So why did you leave McDonald's? Well, I left because I went to school. Well, on the application, you said you were fired. So which one is it? So it goes from there. So it starts right there. So if somebody's going to lie on that application, what do you think they're going to do when they become a police officer? So these things are set. So you go to the police academy, and then throughout the police academy, because I went to Chicago's police academy, and it was a 3-month long process. And you go through all different classes, like Desi was saying, but it's all geared towards policing. And so you go through all this stuff, you graduate from the police academy. When you get sworn in, you're raising your hand to uphold the laws of the state and the country and all of that stuff. So after you get out of the police academy, you're assigned to a field training officer, an FTO. And that process, that's another maybe a couple months that you're riding with this officer, with the field training officer. And it starts like this. The rookie is at the bottom and the field training officer is at the top. As the program goes on, it goes like this, to where the officer is at the bottom and the rookie is doing everything. So you're getting checked, you're getting marked off. He passed this portion of it, and it goes week to week. He passed this portion of it. And what it is and what it's supposed to do is weed out the police officers. So let's say some officer, this rookie is doing terrible, just doing terrible. But they don't want to get rid of this rookie. We see potential in it. So they extend the field training program for that particular officer. But the officer still is not catching on. They should get rid of him. That's what they should do. A lot of times, well, he's a good guy, he's this, or she's a good person, this, that, and the other, so we pass him on. That's another problem. So that problem officer, which they should have never made it through the field training program, they get moved on. So now this rookie officer is out on the road by themselves. So now their chest is out. I passed this, when in reality, you shouldn't have been on the road anyway. So once again, whatever problems or issues they were having in the field training phase of the job, what do you think is going to happen once they get cut loose and those issues were not taken care of? So then they're out on their own. So that's the problem with not getting these officers weeded out when they have the opportunity to do it.
But why in their probationary period would they not, because there's a shortage of police officers? Like, why would they not want to get rid of somebody who's not doing well?
And can I add to that? How much are they protected by the union while they're going to that training program?
They have no union protection until they're off of probation. And then Waukegan, the probationary period is 18 months. So once you get sworn in, that's when it starts. So if it's June 20th, when you get sworn in, so 18 months after that, that's when you get off probation. Because when I started, what we were taught was once you're on probation, once you get started, you keep your mouth shut. You don't get into anything, and essentially keep your mouth shut until you're off of probation, because technically you're not being protected, so they can fire you for anything. I don't like the way Reggie's shirt looked, so you're gone. So once you're off probation, then you have the full protection of the union. So you're in the group, you're in the blue. So
I have a question about that. But how come? So you're telling me, they're on this probationary period where they actually do field work. Why is that not a requirement to do before? That's like giving someone a diploma after 3 months of you did 3 months, and then I know that you're gonna do the work for the next 3 months, so I'm gonna give you your diploma now in advance. Why is the probationary period not part of the police the police academy training before you get sworn in and all that stuff. Like that should be like the final, the cherry on top of the cake, in my opinion. Like, oh, I've mastered all of this. Now I get to be sworn in as an officer. Now I get to be sworn in as an officer, and now I have to figure out how to actually do the field work. You know what I'm saying?
Because when you get sworn in, that's when your benefits start. That's when you start getting paid. You still have to go to the police academy and graduate from the police academy. So you still have to do all of that stuff to get to the end of probation, when you're actually under the protection of the union and you have full benefits and all of that stuff. So that's how that works. So when you're in the field training program, that's still part of the training. You're going through training. They're showing you how to be a police officer, the ins and outs of everything in police work.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I answered it, but that's how the process works. But again, the field training program is there to weed out the bad officers rather. And too often they don't want to get rid of that person. And so it presents a problem. So if there's red flags from the beginning, I guarantee you those red flags are going to be down the road in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years. So they need to be weeded out from the beginning, because once they get off the probation, it makes it that much harder to get rid of them, because the union is going to step in, and we know how the union works in the police world. They're powerful, they're strong, and they rally behind, and they're well organized.
So
I just want to just cut in real quick. It's no surprise that law enforcement on all levels has been infiltrated by white supremacists. There's an FBI memo, 10 years old, that you can Google and read right now. So my thing is, let's say on the flip side, let's say the officer is a good officer, or not officer, but the rookie in training is doing everything right, by the book, following everything to the letter, but he's an undercover white supremacist. How do you weed out for that?
But once again, that just goes back to the process of the background investigation. So you have to check social media. When you sit down, if I come and interview you, Andre, I'm gonna sit down with you, and I'm so and so. I'm here to interview you, because you applied to be a police officer with blah blah department. So I'm sitting down talking to you. I'm going through the application, checking off all this stuff. Let me see your phone, Andre. Let me look through your phone. You give me the phone, I'm looking at pictures, looking at what you're posting, all of this stuff. Now, if there's something in that phone that raises a red flag, I'm going to ask you about it. What does this 333 mean? You know what I mean? What's the forks throwing up, down, whatever the case may be? What are those stars on the back of, all of this stuff? So I'm trying to weed it out and find out. And also, we got to understand they go through a psych exam too. All of this stuff. So the process is supposed to be there to find all of this stuff. But too often than not, people slip through the cracks. I won't even say slip through the cracks. They just walk through the door, because you see those red flags, but then, well, it's not an issue to me. And it's unfortunate, because the steps are there to weed these people out. It's just up to humans to actually, once we find these things, to actually get them out.
Wait,
I have a question.
Wait,
sorry.
So I have a question from Facebook. So it says, so Larnell, you're saying that they learn how to play the game until they can have their benefits.
Well, it's not so much learning how to play the game. What it is that, like we were saying, you go through the police academy, and the police are teaching you the techniques, how to do this, all of this stuff. And then you might get with an FTO, your field training officer, and he's going to tell you, he or she'll tell you, I know you just learned all this stuff in the police academy, but now I'm going to tell you how it's really done. So that mindset already starts. I'm part of the blue. I'm part of this. So that mindset is you've been indoctrinated into that stuff. And so you're just going on. You're going on. And then, like I said, once you get out of field training, then you're out on the street by yourself. You got your own police car. So whatever you're doing, whatever you're feeling, it can come out now, because you're not trying to show that field training officer that you're showing that field training officer that you're worthy to be the job. So if I'm your field training officer, Andre, I'm not going to say, you know what, I hate those Black people, or I hate these women, because I don't know. I shouldn't do that in the first place, because the field training officers should be checking all this stuff off as attitude adjustment, problems with the attitude, biases towards this, that, and the other. So I'm going to, of course, as a rookie, I'm going to put my best foot forward. Then, like I said, once you get out on your own, out in your own car, then all of that stuff is going to come out one way or the other.
Okay, I want to welcome State's Attorney Mike Nierheim. He is on. Welcome to Hard Conversations.
Hi.
Hi there.
My camera here. Bear with me for 1 second.
Okay, that's fine. There's a couple things I want to hear from people who haven't spoken yet. So Kim Woods, do you want to share anything at this time?
Yes, I just a quick question. I know we were speaking about the training and just the way that the officers view their training, their job, and how they come in. Once they, and I don't know if Larnell can answer this, but once you become a police officer, is there continuing? Like, do they continually monitor your mental health? Do they continually train you in the things that you should do as far as being working with the public and the community? I know that they have certain training in tactics, but are there training in community development or how you do mentally, or are you guys forced to, see a psychiatrist? That's just a general question.
They're forced.
Well, there are certain instances where you have to go see a psych, get a psych eval. If you're involved in a whatever type of situation there is, they can require you before you can go back out on the street. You got to go get a psychological evaluation. I don't know if you guys have seen. There's a video that was floating around last week. It was called Officer McMuffin, and it was trending all over Twitter and everything. It was this police officer. She said she had made an order at McDonald's mobilely, and then when she went to get it, she couldn't. It took them a long time to give her order. She said, I think she was just getting off duty because she was in uniform, and you can hear the radio in the background, her police radio. But she's going on and going on, and then as she goes, you can see she's having a breakdown. Why can't you guys? All I wanted was my food. I've been working long hours, and you don't give me my food. Why can't the public just take pity on us? We need your help. This is not fair. She just starts crying. I mean, she has a meltdown. My first thought was, if her supervisors, and I'm not going to even say if, when her supervisors see that video, the first thing they should do is relieve her of duty and make her go get some type of evaluation, because it's clear that she was not fit for duty. So to answer Kim's question, there's in-service training, but usually the in-service training is geared more, like Kim has said, toward physical tactics and all of that stuff. So you may have a little bit of training on different stuff outside of the physical aspect or tactics, but it's not a lot. It's not a lot to what I believe what the public would like to see.
Okay. All right, so State's Attorney Nierheim, thank you for joining us. We had an opportunity to talk a little bit earlier today. So as I shared with you earlier, our conversation kind of started with qualified immunity, but then it kind of went not necessarily in a different direction. It had more to do with the fact that that's probably not the first step, because every police officer isn't, what we say, charger or pleading for qualified immunity. So with that, please feel free to share, because when we're trying to figure out what the first step is going to be in terms of getting bad police officers off the street. I mean, that's what it boils down to, I would say, in a nutshell.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on. Appreciate the opportunity. I'm happy to share certainly my thoughts, but I also want to do a lot of listening during my time on this. So, in terms of qualified immunity and some ideas moving forward, there's legislative changes that certainly need to happen. That's going to be a little bit of a slower process, unfortunately, because of the way the legislature works. But, to back up, I think it's very important that if a police officer breaks the law, that they're held accountable. And, I've charged police officers for crimes. We've prosecuted officers. We're currently prosecuting police officers for various crimes. it's not something that anybody wants to do, but again, if police officers break the law, just like anybody else, they're going to be prosecuted. The challenge is finding out about those violations. What we see oftentimes happens after the fact is if a police officer is in violation of a policy or a law, and they're brought up for discipline, there's a whole slew of union protections that come into place, which are frankly, very difficult to overcome. And this is all before my office is even made aware of the situation. What happens sometimes then is officers will quit. If they think that the discipline is going to result in being fired, they'll quit, go to another department who may not know of the discipline, may not know of the issue, and then you have that problem officer in a different department. So there's some red flags. Obviously, if you see police officers going to several different departments throughout their career, that's a red flag, but it's not a sole indicator because it's not unusual for other officers to switch departments. So, we also have a Brady list in our office where if we do become aware of a situation where a police officer commits a crime or a violation of either law or policy or really anything where their credibility is called in question, we put them on a list, we notify defense counsel, and we don't call them as witnesses in our cases anymore. Again, those are situations where we have to be advised about that conduct because we're often not going to know about it. If a police officer, for example, is brought up on a disciplinary situation with their chief and lies during that hearing, if the chief notifies our office, then we conduct a Brady review and may put that officer on our list depending on the situation. But again, we are relying on being notified about that. If it's a crime that's committed, that's pretty clear because then we are notified and we'll prosecute those violations. But one idea that I've heard, and I think Mayor Lightfoot in Chicago was one of the first to talk about this, that I actually think needs to be discussed a lot further and I think has some merit to it, is the idea of licensure for police officers. So, currently in Illinois, if you're a hairstylist, a massage therapist, a doctor, a lawyer, you have to be licensed, and there's a licensing body that also regulates your conduct. Lawyers, for example, we're licensed, the ARDC, which is a state organization that through the bar that or the Supreme Court that regulates our conduct. And if a lawyer does something unethical or criminal, they face discipline through the ARDC, independent of any other discipline they may face through their employer, through civil process, or through the criminal justice system. So it's sort of a fourth level of accountability, another level of accountability. This would require the creation of a statewide agency that would oversee this licensing process, but also the disciplinary hearings. The other interesting part of this, and I know we all know of situations where officers don't always report each other's unethical conduct. With lawyers, there is a requirement that if a lawyer knows of another lawyer's unethical conduct, they have to report that conduct to the ARDC. And you could have a similar requirement for law enforcement, where if a fellow officer was aware of somebody's unethical conduct, they would be required. It wouldn't be an issue of whether they wanted to or not. They'd be required to report that, or they would be subject to discipline themselves. So that's a system that's already in place for lawyers and other professionals, and I don't see why, at least we shouldn't be having a serious discussion about implementing that for police officers.
Go ahead, Andre.
So to kind of go off of what you were saying, so the thing is, they're required to do it, but there's no one over them to make them do it or force them to do it. So I think, I don't know, maybe he's watching movies or TV shows, but I think that the officers don't want to face repercussions from their own precinct or whatever. I don't know how that works. I know it's a fraternal order. I understand how fraternities work, things like that. So I think that they probably want to, they're afraid to because they don't want to face some kind of backlash from their fellow officers. So that kind of makes it difficult to kind of hold them accountable to that. I mean, they should do it, but it's not happening.
Right, exactly. And that's why this might help with that. Again, it's not perfect, but it might help with that because, again, as a lawyer, if I know that another lawyer did something unethical, even if it's my best friend, and I don't want to report it for whatever reason, I have to. I don't have a choice. So it kind of takes the choice out of the equation. and you have to make that report or you're subject to discipline. You could lose your own license. And that would make it, I would hope, a little easier for officers to make those reports, because if for whatever reason they didn't want to, they would have that out by saying, look, I have to, this is required.
But, and I'm sorry, hi, Mike, how are you?
Good to see you.
You too. Hey, what you're speaking about, in Minnesota, they have that, the duty to intervene. And so that incident that happened with George Floyd, you know, what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing is that the Chauvin, the officer that actually had his knee on Mr. Floyd, he was a senior officer on the scene. The other officers were, I think one had been on a week and the other was just not that long. So they were junior to him. So in that instance, what you're saying, like I said, they have that in Minnesota, from what I understand, a duty to intervene. So it was their duty to do something and they did not do it. But as you know, all of this stuff, it sounds good, but getting it past the union, that's almost like, you know, pushing a boulder uphill in the mud, you know, because unions, as you said, getting anything past the union. And then on the flip side, like you said, also, when it comes to police departments actually reporting this stuff, let's say to your office, by the time it gets there, it's so watered down, if you get it, you're not getting the full report. And then later on down the line, you may hear what actually happened. So by then, do you go back and bring charges sufficient to whatever was going on?
Yeah, no, it's certainly a problem. And, you know, there's also been discussion of mandatory reporting from chiefs, where if they're aware of conduct, they have to report it. Right now, I think most of our chiefs do a good job. They're not required to, but I ask them to, and they do. But there's no law that currently requires them to report that conduct to me. You know, a lot of times what we've seen in other areas is, you know, again, because of that disciplinary process is so difficult because of the power of some of these unions. If a police chief is faced with the option of letting the guy just quit and not have to go through that whole arbitration and all those other processes, you know, they'll just let him go and take the easy way out, and that person's going to go be a problem somewhere else. And, you know, maybe down the road we'll find out about it when something worse happens. And, you know, that's obviously a concern.
Well, and that's part of the problem, because I know in Waukegan, I had a discussion with the former mayor, and he was telling me, you know, over the past, I don't know how many years, Waukegan has fired 40 officers. I'm like, I'm not aware of Waukegan ever firing anybody, one person that I know of, and throughout my career there. And what happens is, like you said, you know, they get you in a corner, you know, tell you your best option right now is to resign. So in resigning, all they're doing is pushing that problem child off to another police department. And so, as we were discussing earlier, if you got a problem child, it should come back when a background investigation is done as to why that officer left Waukegan and, let's say, went to Chicago, or left Chicago and went to LA's police department. So there's a misstep someplace where the information is not being passed along, that we have a problem officer here. And so I know one thing that was coming up earlier, they were talking about a national database, you know, but once again, the database is only as good as the information put in, you know, just like any computer. So if the information is not put in there, you type up Mike Neerheim, officer and blah, blah, blah. If that information is not put in there, Mike Neerheim is still looked at as a glowing police officer. So all of this stuff still. And then one other thing I wanted to mention also, officers feeling comfortable. For lack of a better word, there should be some type of whistleblower protection where officers are actually protected. Because you know, we hear this thing about, you know, an officer says something against another officer, then, you know, you go out on the street and somebody's not going to back you up and all of this other stuff. That should never, ever happen. Right. Never, ever happen. And so it should be, again, like I said, some type of, whatever you want to call it, I mean, valid, written in stone protection for the officers to step forward and say that this happened. I'm not going to be a part of that. I don't want any retaliation against me.
Okay, so I want to say, so Andre has a point, and then I'm going to go to Facebook. There's a question on there. But remember, the goal I want to just keep pushing towards is a solution. Like, what is it that we can do to move forward so that we can do, I mean, we have to do something. What is that? What does that look like? So Andre, go ahead and make your point, and then I'm going to go to Facebook.
So my quick point is, at Comcast, they have something set up to where, like, if you feel like your supervisor is treating you unfairly, there's a number you can call, and you can report it anonymously. I think that's a pretty practical solution. That way, the person who's reporting doesn't feel like they're that they're going to face some kind of repercussion. It's anonymous, and then the higher ups can take action and figure out what the next step is. So I think that will kind of, it gives a protection to the one who's going to report, who blows the whistle. I think that's legitimate.
And I would just add, I know you're going to a question here, but these are great points that could be woven into this licensing program, because certainly whistleblower protection could be written into that. The anonymous complaint provision could be written into that. And the other thing that happens with the ARDC, for example, is if there's an investigation, that investigation is done by the ARDC, not the office or the department that where that officer currently with the lawyer where that lawyer works. So it's an independent agency that's doing that investigation regarding the complaint. And that certainly would have to be built into this as well.
I'm sorry, I just want to throw that in. So how hard is it to just have them set up a phone line for, I mean, does that have to be part of a policy, or is that something that can just be set up to say, hey, your partner's doing wrong, or however that looks, call this number to make your complaint anonymously? I mean, that should be something that's pretty simple, or is it not?
It seems to me that would be pretty simple to set up, sure.
I mean, who do we talk to about that specifically?
Well, if this is being put as part of this licensing body, that's, as Larnell said, that's something that's going to have to be, the unions, I'm sure, are going to push back against that. That's going to involve legislative action and creation at the state level, funding of another organization to oversee all that. But if you're just simply talking about having a complaint process within a department, I don't see why any individual chief couldn't implement that. Now, what chiefs run into a lot, to be fair to the other side, is if they're going to properly investigate an officer, and an anonymous complaint comes in, they need somebody as a complainant so they can properly go in and review that complaint, because somebody could make anonymous complaints against an honest officer for whatever reason. And, that officer is certainly entitled to some due process as well. So, we want to make sure whatever process we build here is fair. Obviously, we want to root out the bad officers, but we want to protect the good ones too, because, sometimes criminals don't like good police officers. So we want to make sure that there's a due process involved.
Thank you.
And the thing I wanted to say real quick on that too, I would not want to see an anonymous system, because to me, that goes against everything that we're talking about. If there's going to be an anonymous system, that means that officer doesn't feel comfortable enough to step forward. And so if we're talking about whistleblower protection and all of this stuff, it should be where that officer feels completely comfortable in going forward. And then on the other thing, in the police world, there are no secrets when it comes to an officer making an anonymous tip against another officer. I don't see that ever staying anonymous, because let's say if I said Officer Mike Neerheim did this and that to the other, or I report this to my sergeant, and it goes up the chain of command. If that sergeant goes out and let's say he gets drunk and he's talking to another sergeant, Mike called and he made a complaint against Andre. And so it may be the most innocent thing in the world, but it never stays a secret like that. So I see that as a problem. So I would be against any anonymous reporting. I want it to be upfront so we can actually protect that person and show that the system is working to protect that person that's coming forward.
Well, the other reality, in Larnell, as Waukegan's the biggest municipal police department in Lake County. The sheriff's another big department, but outside of maybe a couple others, Gurnee and maybe a couple other departments, most departments in Lake County are pretty small. Not a lot of police officers. So word's going to spread no matter what around that department regarding who said what. So you're right. Ideally, you want a system where people feel comfortable making that report. But again, with the licensing provision, they'd be required to.
Okay, I want to go to Facebook. Wait, I want to go to Facebook. And this went kind of way back to when we started, so I apologize. How is it that police can choose not to go to work but still get paid, but teachers, et cetera, go on strike and don't get paid?
Well, actually, they can't. I mean, it's and I'm assuming they're referring to what's going on in Atlanta. We've heard the term the blue flu, work shortages, work stoppages, and all of that stuff. So, what is probably happening is these officers are calling in using sick time. They're calling in using personal time that they actually have, but they're doing it in masses where it's actually affecting how many officers are out on the street. So the thing is, what do you do as a supervisor? How can you tell somebody that has that time that, no, you got to come in? Well, I'm calling in sick. So you can't order them to come in if they're calling in sick. Now, let's say what usually happens if it's 3 days or more, then they might be required to have a doctor's excuse or something like that. So that's a whole different thing. But if you got, 100 officers on the shift, and 50 of them call in sick, it's an issue, but what do you do if they have the actual time that they're calling in for? So,
Okay.
Also, I just wanted to add in there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I wanted to add in there, just kind of putting all of this together and also answering this question that was just asked from Facebook. I think the mentality of what it is to be a police officer has to be addressed. And I think that by doing that, I was speaking to someone earlier and they gave the example of a doctor or a nurse or a hospital. And this kind of will put all of this together, even what Mike Nerum was saying. When you want a hospital full of nurses and doctors who want to be there and who want to help the people that they're there. You don't want people that are just there because they want to get a paycheck, or maybe they were the worst people in the school and the hospital decided to just hire them. You want the best, and you want people who are actually there to help. So yes, there are going to be officers who are going to leave with all of these changes, but you want officers who are there who actually want to do the job and they actually want to work with the community and protect the community, and they take that oath. So to me, if you call in sick, you're one of the officers that should probably be gone, because you're not there for the right reason. You're there because of your own personal reasons. You think that you don't want the status quo to leave. You don't want the things to change. So you should be happy sometimes, I think, with those officers who expose themselves and say, I'm not coming in because I'm sick. Because I know some officers and they're out there. They're still out there. Even with all that's going on, they're out there because they have the right motive to be out there. They're not out there for any other reason. Now, to kind of bridge all this together, I like the ideal of going with, you were saying, where do we start? I like the ideal of going with the legislation of what Mike was saying. I like going towards it. If you know something is if you're a doctor or whatever, or you're a nurse and you know someone is doing something that is not right, you will lose your license if you do not report them. And have that protection. You have to, I agree, it can't be anonymous, because you have to be able to stand in front of a board and say, I know this person did this and they did it incorrectly. What is that going to do? That's going to knock down the good old boys club, because you will be blackballed from the police department. But that's going to have to come with you saying, look, y'all not taking me down with you. Now, I don't want to throw in a movie like Training Day, but it's kind of like the dude on Training Day. He was like, Denzel, you ain't taking me down. So if I got to do whatever I got to do to get out of this bunch of people, and that's a movie, y'all. But unfortunately, that's kind of what's really happening. They bring somebody in and they say, this is what we're doing. And, and if you get with the program, then you good. If you're not, you're going to be exiled. But he's like, no, you're not bringing me down with you. So I think needs to be legislation. I think that's where we need to start. I think we need to start with legislation on what's happening in Minneapolis. If you stand there as an officer and you watch another officer murder someone, you going down too. All of y'all going down. You going down just like he did. It's almost like you had your knee on his neck. You're going down too. Start with that. That will make more officers come forward because you ain't pulling me down with you. And then what Larnell was saying, you need to have that protection for them if they do it. So that's why I'm not with the immunity part. If that's the way the group wants to go, that's fine. I'm more on doing the legislation to, expose bad cops and protecting the ones that do. So that's where I'm at, guys.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go to Facebook, and then Reggie has something. I just want to make sure that I get it. A lot of this is comments now. So one person said the proposed national database should at least go back in the previous records. Another person said most organizations have some type of hotline for that to happen. Someone else said whistleblower protection should be implemented immediately. Another person, the union should be protecting good cops and ousting bad cops on their own. Let's see, there's a lot going on here. There's hotline, those hotlines, however, need to be third party, not within the precinct. Someone else said, I think the anonymous hotline will be a good thing for public use instead. And then also a police should be required to know the to know the law at a minimum. So that's there, Reggie.
Well, I think, I'm sorry, go ahead, Reggie.
Reggie, go ahead.
No, I was just reading an article that came out, and it was from Colorado. And Friday morning, it said that the government had just signed in new policy, and this policy is basically dealing with what we're talking about. And this was the new reform bill that they're coming out with, and they're supposed to be the first state that have done it. So first of all, it said all law enforcement officers must be required to wear body cams by 2023, and the video must be made public. So that was the first thing they did. Chokeholds are prohibited. They prohibited all chokeholds. Shooting a fleeing suspect is prohibited. Deadly force can only be used if someone's life is in danger. Police must report every time they stop a person that they suspect of a crime, along with the person's race, and the gender must also be identified so they can find out whether or not they're doing racial profiling. Police must report wrongdoing by fellow officers. So now there has become a law that if you know your fellow officer is doing something wrong, it's your job as a police to report it. If not, you can end up losing your job, discipline even up to termination. And then last but not least, police officers can be held personally liable for damages up to $25,000 if they're found guilty of violating somebody's civil rights. So they kind of address everything that we're talking about. And I haven't gotten the details on everything. This is just something I just ran across that's happened in Colorado. But I think something that we need to look into as far as moving the legislation, that those are really some pretty good steps for us to start off with. And I think that would definitely be helpful in the cause as far as what we're trying to do.
There's also a question online. Can we utilize the Supreme Court at all?
I guess that's for me. So, you don't go directly to the Supreme Court to make law. The legislature makes the law, then the Supreme Court would interpret it later, and that would be years down the road. So if there were particular laws right now that needed to be, that were subject to interpretation, that, where the Supreme Court would be asked to come in and opine, that's a possibility. But really, I think most of what we're talking about is creating either new laws or new regulations or new agencies. And that's not something the Supreme Court would do. That's something our legislature or the executive branch of the Illinois government could do. But, a lot of what's been proposed by some of those national police reform bills are great. Some of that's already in existence here in Illinois. Chokeholds, for example, we are not allowed. We don't allow those unless if an officer is fighting for their life with somebody, then that's a different scenario. But they're great. A lot of great ideas in there, but again, I keep getting back to, in addition to those, this licensure idea for me is intriguing. I also think more mandatory training is important. When I came on the call just a little while ago, you guys were talking about mental health. I think I caught the tail end of that part of the conversation, and that's really important because when you look at the law enforcement profession, has the highest rate of suicide of any other job. And that's really because of a combination of a couple of factors. One, It's a very stressful job. Police, and they're seeing people at their worst every day. They're under a lot of pressure, a lot of stress. And then you combine that with this culture that has existed historically where mental health, anything involving mental health is looked at as a weakness. So if you're experiencing some sort of mental health crisis, and I think, Larnell, you were talking about this when I came on, and God forbid you ask for help as an officer, you're going to be blackballed. You may lose your job. You may, that's going to be discouraged. And that culture has to change because you have this combination of people in extreme stress, going through, a lot of trauma every day. They have access to guns pretty easily, obviously. And then that's combined with this culture that discourages anybody from seeking help or practicing any form of self-care. So, some departments have been good about trying to change that culture and, institute peer support groups, institute, mandatory mental health wellness checks, things like that, training on not only cultural awareness and implicit bias, but we just did a training in my office not too long ago, for example, on cynicism, on how this job can make us all cynical. And Larnell, I'm sure you can relate. I mean, when you see negativity on a daily basis, it has a tendency to make you cynical. My wife accuses me of being cynical sometimes. And I think, we certainly have to make sure we're aware of that and that we're making sure that we're not letting this get to us and then change who we are. So we become cynical, we become cold, and then that snowballs. So that mental health component is critical because, I know we're talking about the bad officers, but we also have to make sure those good officers are being supported and that this job isn't getting to them and changing them in a negative way or impacting them negatively. So I'm glad that was discussed. And I think, making some of this mandatory as some of this reform is discussed should be at the forefront of it.
Okay, I'm going to go to a question on Facebook, and then Patricia, I'm just going to have you ask the question that you put in the chat. So the question is, what is the process of getting around the unions once the new requirements are presented to legislators?
So, that's going to have to be done legislatively, and we're in Illinois, so that's going to be a pretty heavy lift. But, some legislators are going to have the courage to try to take this on, and then it's going to have to be bargained. But somebody brought up the point that's a good one that, good cops don't like this either. Good cops don't like the fact that the reputation of law enforcement as a whole right now is probably the lowest it's been in my career, in spite of the good work that a lot of good officers are doing. So, I think there are a lot of good police officers out there that are as upset as anybody on this meeting about what's going on. And they need to be part of the change as well. And they need to be the voice to try to move this forward, and they're part of these unions. So, that would be my recommendation, is to get those officers involved because they're the ones driving what the unions do.
Well, wait, Larnell, I'm going to let Patricia ask you first. Go ahead.
So with what Angela keeps bringing back, what can we do? How can we be involved? And Mr. Neerum, you keep on talking about this licensure, which is a good idea. How can we, as this group, be involved in that, either with what goes into, the licensure, or how can we be involved with trying to get something like that passed?
I think all of us, you all have relationships with local lawmakers, and you have a platform. I think we need to keep this discussion going. It's not my idea. I don't want to pretend that it is. It's something I heard that I'm intrigued by, and I think it could work. So I think, what you can all do, what we can do, what I can do, is to promote this and make sure that we're talking about this as a serious option.
What I was going to say, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, to piggyback off of what Mike had said earlier about the good officers, getting involved. I think we're at a place, and we discussed this in the weeks prior, that we're in a place right now where what happened with George Floyd is taking things to a new level, because we're seeing protests. Usually by now, when incidents like this happen, it's kind of died down, and we're in a holding pattern, waiting till the next incident occurs.
And that is.
But again, we're here now. It's a different feel about this all the way around, and for good officers, those good officers need to step up. because we know there are more good officers than there are bad officers. And they need to step up collectively together and form a front, because I think they should be offended by all of this stuff, and they should take ownership of all of this stuff, because not blaming the public, not blaming someone else, blame the officers that are doing this. We got to look at the root. We can't just jump on the top of the tree and start cutting it off. We got to go to the root of all of these problems. And the root are these officers that are doing this stuff. And so the unions, and I understand union protections, I understand, you know, what the union job is, and police officers as a whole don't like defense attorneys. But you have a union that essentially is a defense attorney for bad officers. But you rarely hear rather officers say anything about the union protecting the bad officer, spending union money to defend these officers. And again, I know they deserve due process and all of this other stuff, but they got to speak up. They got to come out and say this stuff and be heard. And their weight would go a long way, but we rarely hear that.
I'm gonna have, I put it in the chat who should speak, because I want to make sure that everyone has a chance to say something. But I do just want to put it out there, not for anyone to answer now, but how does a normal average citizen know who's a good cop and who's not? Like, I personally know some policemen, so I can say, yes, this is a good one, but that's probably 3, including Larnell, who's retired and related to me. So Kim, go ahead. Kim Norland, I'm sorry.
So I guess I have a couple different thoughts and then maybe a couple questions. So talking about the licensure thing, I think that's a good idea, especially when I think about like hairstylists and estheticians and things when they get their licenses. One of the things that's required to keep that license is continuing education. Like every year they have to have so many hours of continuing education where they learn about new techniques, new things. And I think that should be part of, you know, police licensing is, you know, they should require so many hours of like counseling or mental health, you know, screening, you know, sensitivity training, you know, how to de-escalate situations. I think those kind of things should all be part of keeping that license, so that they don't just like pass their test to get a license once and then no one ever checks up on it. So just, you know, another way to hold them accountable to, okay, so you learn this, are you practicing this? Are you learning as things evolve, as society changes, as technology changes? You know, are you learning and growing with those things? And then also with the licensing board, you know, making sure that who's that board made up of? Like who's going to be in charge? Who's going to sit on that board? You know, because we don't want just police officers on that board, you know, or former police officers. You know, you want to represent a large, you know, you want different people, you know, and you want that to be a diverse of, you know, races, gender, all of that. So making sure that it's not just a continuation of the, you know, good old boys club. So, you know, that was my thought on the licensing board, whoever that, you know, is once, if that ever becomes a reality. My question also about the licensing thing is, you know, so it sounds like, and I don't always understand how all this works. I don't, so if someone knows, I don't know, but like, so, you know, I'm in Louisiana, I'm in New Orleans, and, you know, there's some of us, so not everyone's all in Illinois. So what are things that we can do so that it's not just like, so Illinois, you know, changing things in Illinois, changing things in Lake County is great, but we also want to see it, you know, throughout the whole country. So what can I do as someone who's in New Orleans? And I think, you know, we people in Arizona on the call too. So it's like, where do we start? Like, who do I go to, or what do I do? Or do I grab all my friends and say, hey, come with me, we're going over here? Or, you know, just so things that we can do no matter where we are to get the ball rolling and, you know, start working on these things.
Good questions.
You know, I would add that, you know, with ideas like this, because you're right. I mean, this is different. This, whatever comes out of what's going on now, my hope, and I really believe this to be the case, that this is going to really, this is different. What we come out of this situation with these reforms are going to stick. And I think if you've got something that holds in Illinois or another state, let's say licensure, for example, I could see that catching like wildfire and spreading around the country, and that would be easily replicatable with every other state. So, I think just one state needs to come forward and get something going first, and then we can get things moving around, or it could be part of the federal legislation that would encompass the whole country. But in terms of what you could do, I think, certainly like forums like this, and then whoever your local decision makers are, your local leaders, the local groups, make sure that this is part of the discussion, and any other ideas that you have. But, people are listening, and they need to be.
Thank you. Who's next? Lenora?
I definitely agree with all that Kimberly Norland said. My main concern, since all of these discussions have been going on, the webinars and the what we're doing now, which is always great because it brings awareness and get the ball rolling with our discussions, is my concern is that dang on union, and just dealing with the union issues, and almost like, because I know Representative Rita had made a comment about the mayor's positions and what they could do to be more assertive, like even the Chicago mayor, maybe revisiting some of the contracts that's in place with these unions. But when you think of the word union, you think, wow, you think of even with the teachers. The union, to me, needs to be very much a part of these discussions, because a lot of times they may push back on some of the things we're even coming at them with. So I just need more understanding with the union. If they're strong holding and holding things down and not wanting to change things, or if they're in agreement with things, how much does a mayor have to make changes and stop things and not renegotiate? It's just the union concerns me, you guys. We can do all of this, planning and who do we go to, how do we help? But even the situation with the mayor from Atlanta, a lot of times, if you go to the media and on The View and all of these shows, and the union's like, what? You're not talking to us? Oh, we gonna call in sick. We gonna show you that we're in control here, and you need us. You need police officers, whether you like it or not. We get rid of the bad ones, but you still need us. I'm just concerned with the whole union thing. Maybe Larnell or even Mike Niram can speak to it, but that's just my concern of how much control do they have.
That's good.
I look at it as the union has a lot of control. I mean,
Right.
they're powerful. They have money. They have they donate to the politicians, elected officials, and why should the union come to the table and talk to anyone? I mean, unless it's something in it for them, and I mean something substantial, why should they come and talk to anybody? They have the power, so until we find a way to break that power down, again, why should they? And it's a lot of instances, unions fight for certain things, and once they get them, it's almost like an act of God to get rid of it. As I said before, the residency requirement in Waukegan, the president of the union at that time and the vice president, they were elected solely to get rid of the residency requirement in Waukegan. And at that time, I was 100% for that. But then I saw what actually happened. It was horrible because it brought in officers with no ties to the community, didn't want any ties to the community, and it took policing in Waukegan to a whole different level. And so that's what happened. So to try to, and I'm using that as a stepping stone with the residency requirement. So if all of us on this feed, we got together, everybody that's listening on and watching on Facebook, everyone got together and they said, we're going to go fight the union in Waukegan about the residency requirement. They would not give it up unless they got something substantially better or different to go for. So once again, why would a union? Why should they? They should rather. Well, why would they come to the table and talk to us about anything?
Well, even on that note, It's one thing, me being a union rep, the unions are still subjected to the laws. So if you did it through legislation, they still would be subjected to the changes that's in the law, regardless of how powerful they are. The unions are not above the laws. So we would definitely, if we change the laws, then the unions would have to conform to the law. So it still comes back to the legislation needs to be changed, and that's where we need to work. I think personally that's the area we need to work on, getting new laws on the books.
Okay. All right, Freddie.
You're muted.
Oh.
You're muted.
Okay. I would say for the most part, I'm in agreement with everybody, but I guess a part of my frustration is that we talk about all these reforms and licenses and all these things, but at the same time, down in Kentucky, they named a law after Breonna, but the people who killed her still haven't been charged. And I think they just fired one of them like yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
So like we talk about all this stuff, but like what is it doing?
Well, I think that's why we are talking about it, because we want to enact change. I keep saying enact and effect change, right? So while it did not help Breonna, while it is not helping George Floyd in this moment, like if we can put something together that will then carry on. I feel the same in terms of it being like, how long is it going to take? But if we're saying that we can do this and we can hopefully prevent this from happening to anyone else, like the different situations that have happened. That's what my hope is. But I too feel like, how long is it going to take for us to get this done?
No, like I said, I'm in agreement with everybody on. I'm not down talking to anything. I just think I don't know if we need more attention toward her case, or maybe, but like I'm really frustrated about it. That still nothing has happened. But it's like 2 or 3 months after the fact, and still nothing.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I jump in?
Sure.
You know, I jumped on the call earlier than I said I was going to, because I want to make sure I put as much time into this as I can, because, you know, I think a lot of times people in my position in situations like this feel the need to come out and say, you know, here's all the things I'm doing. And, you know, and there's certainly a lot that we're doing that I'm happy to talk about. But my concern is I feel like when I say that, I don't want to come off as if I am somebody that's not aware that there aren't issues. And I think that happens sometimes. You feel like you need to show, here's all the programs we've implemented. Here are the things we're trying to do to address this. And when you do that, you come off as sort of tone deaf to the fact that, you know, there are, in light of that, there's still issues. So I want everybody on this call to know that, you know, there's a lot that I've done. There's a lot that we've tried to implement here, but by no way are we close to being where we need to be. And I recognize that. So, you know, I also wanted to come on this call today, as I've been trying to do a lot more recently, and just listen to people and, you know, try to come up with other ideas, other programs that maybe I didn't think about, or, you know, maybe we haven't implemented. So if anybody has any ideas or thoughts, or as it relates to how I can be better, how the state's attorney's office can be better, and particularly how we serve the Black community and how we build trust, I'd love to hear them.
One thing that I'd like to say is that I listened to the I forgot the name of the forum that you were on the other day, Mike. I think it was Thursday night.
Yeah.
And I asked a question about Black people in policing and the state's attorneys in specifically in your office. And you know, Mayor Cunningham, Mayor Rockingham, and I forget the mayor's name from Gurnee.
Billy McKinney.
No, it's
I forget
Kevorkian. I think.
Yeah, she spoke up too. And essentially everyone was saying the same thing, that we're trying, but we're failing. And, you know, when I asked the question, I pretty much knew what the answer was going to be, but just to get it out there. So my thing is, here it is, it's 2020. And why, in your particular office, you know, I know that there aren't any Black supervisors. Not supervisors, but any Black investigators. I don't know how many assistants that you have that are Black, but throughout my career in Waukegan, I can only remember, I think 4. you know, throughout the last, 25, 30 years that I've been associated with the department. And so that's an issue. So it boils down to, once again, in the police world, in the judicial system, we don't have our place at the table. So, and I think you, Mike, had made a comment rather, about, you know, when somebody, let's say somebody Black gets caught up in the system, it's usually they're arrested by a white officer. They may go see a white detective. Then when they go to before a judge, the judge is white. The attorney's in the courtroom, everybody's white. If if it ends up going to a jury, you know, the 9 out of 10, or the majority of the times, the jury doesn't look like them. So it's not a jury of their peers. So the whole system is frightening from the beginning. So when you talk about, I look at it when we're talking about hiring Black police officers, you know, there's that negative image from the beginning. Because I can remember the first time I had any police interaction, I was 12 years old and I got accused of jumping out of a cab, you know? So our interaction within the Black community is, and mine was when I was young, was to run when I saw a police officer. That's what was in me. That was what was put in me, because they're not there to be your friend. So you see the police officer, so you run. And so going back to the original thing is we have to develop not a relationship, but develop an environment where when we get a Black officer, when we get a Black prosecutor, when we get, well, anything in the judicial system, we have to make sure that everything is there for them to succeed. And oftentimes it isn't, be it biases from other people, be it they just don't want you around, all of that stuff. And I've seen it a million times where you get a Black officer and then that Black officer doesn't make it, like we were saying earlier, out of the field training program, you know, for whatever reason. So we gotta, and I guess my question to you, Mike, is where are you looking for attorneys? And again, when I asked the question the other day, it was watered down to minorities. I'm not talking about minorities. I'm talking about Black people specifically.
Yeah. So I've hired 7 Black attorneys since I've been in office, actually 8, because one of them I hired and then rehired. He left and then came back. So, you know, we've tried really hard. The office today is more diverse than it was when you were here, but it's still not anywhere near where it needs to be. In terms of where I go and how I recruit, and that's an important part of this, because when I first came in, and it was always a priority of mine. And when I first came in, you know, the first pool of applicants we had, I don't think I had one African-American person apply. And it'd be easy to sit back and say, okay, well, I just don't get the applicants and I'm going to hire out of that pool. But I realized very quickly that that's a cop-out. I mean, you have to be able to go out, you have to recruit actively to try to encourage people to want to be prosecutors. Because the reality is right now, in particular, if you're a Black male in law school, you're not probably wanting to be a prosecutor right now. And so we have to understand, number one, that that's the case, and then try to get to those folks and try to get them to see a different side of who we are. And so we do that through internships. We do that through going to law schools, going to colleges. I was talking to Angela earlier. We even start with middle school kids here in Waukegan, North Chicago, in Zion, where we bring them in and let them job shadow, be part of our office for a day or whatever it takes to hopefully give them a different experience than they might otherwise have had with law enforcement and with us, and get them to see who we really are. And then hopefully in doing that, inspire them to say, you know what, I'm going to be the state's attorney someday, or I'm going to be a judge, or I'm going to be a defense attorney. So we're trying to come at it from a lot of different angles and go as far upstream as middle school, or sometimes even earlier, and then into college and law schools. And sometimes I've found that, frankly, my best recruiting has been word of mouth, where I'll call friends of mine that are Black attorneys and say, hey, I've got an opening. Do you know of anybody? Can you send somebody to me? Anybody that in your network? And that's frankly been my most effective way to bring on minority candidates. And then you're right. It's making sure you have a culture once you get people here where they want to stay. You know, we have a pretty low turnover in our office, which is good. People generally come here and they stay, which is ultimately good for the people of Lake County. But the turnover being as low as it is means there's not often an opportunity to hire new people. So there are a lot of different challenges, but I'm aware of them. And I just want you to know that it's something that I've tried hard to fix. And I'm not by any means pretending that the problem's solved yet, because I'm very aware of the perception when you come into a courtroom in Waukegan. Hopefully we'll be back in person here. Now it's all via Zoom, but and in fact, we train on this because we talk to all our prosecutors about the things that we're doing to even further some of those perceptions. One scenario we talk about a lot is, imagine if you are the mother of a defendant and you're coming into court and you already believe that the whole system is unfair. You already believe the whole system is stacked against your son. And what do you see when you come into court and you're watching court? You're seeing a white prosecutor, a white judge, a white defense attorney. Maybe the prosecutor is joking around with the judge in the hallway, drinking coffee before court even starts. What message does all of that send to the people that are watching court that already believe that the whole system is unfair and biased? So, those are things we're trying really hard to fix. And, that might not be anything improper. They might be talking about, a game or something like that, but we have to be very aware of the messages that we're sending and everything we do, from as what we're doing in a courtroom to what we're doing when we hire people. And then the culture we have in our office, like I said, and like you brought up, to make people that come here feel comfortable. We don't have any Black investigators yet. Haven't really had many applicants in that regard, but again, that gets back to recruitment. I just hired recently the first female investigator, I think, in the history of the state's attorney's office. So that's a step in the right direction. But again, like I said at the front of this, we're not perfect. This is a process, and I'm trying and I'm listening.
And one other thing I'd like to add to that is everything that we're talking about and everything that you just said, let's say it goes to the recruitment in the police world too. So all of this stuff that you just said, and I can give you personal examples when I've gotten into it with court personnel, some assistants in the state's attorney's office, and you walk through the megatometers, and a lot of times people don't see you as a Black officer. They just see you as a Black defendant. So when I walk into the courtroom, if I didn't have a badge hanging out, the deputy might say, well, what can I help you with? Because there was one instance when I was actually sitting in the jury box before a trial, officers sit in the jury box. And the deputy walked over to me and said, you can't sit here. I'm like, why? He said, that's for police officers. So he just assumed. And I said, well, I'm a police officer. So what he said was, why didn't you tell me? My first thought, why didn't you ask? I'm not just going to come and sit in this box not knowing where to sit. So a lot of times those biases, like you said, are out there. So in the police world, imagine being a police officer and all of these things are stacked up against you as a Black police officer. So then you it's like you're fighting the department, you're fighting stuff out on the street and all of this stuff. So again, to me, in the police world, it goes back to the images that we portray out there. And there are I know there are ways to get around all of this. We just have to find a way to do it. Because again, this is 2020 and we're still having conversations, like it's back in the 60s. Why can't we recruit this, that, or the other? And I think though we should be further ahead than this. And I understand in the police world, all the images, if I would not want to be a police officer right now, if I was just coming into it, I would not want to be one, not because of the profession, but what's happening in the police world is out on the street. So it's difficult.
So I want to say this because I didn't realize we have watch parties happening and there's lots of questions that I just saw. So there's a ton of questions. So I want to be able to hit everyone's question. It's not going to happen. There's a lot, but I do want to, Mike, you had a hard stop at 12:30.
Well, I can soften it up a little bit.
Okay. Because I do want to say across the board, I love the conversation, right? But again, I'm kind of going back to let's start focusing on the solution. So it's like we know everything that's going on, right? We know that there's bad stuff. We know that there's good cops. We know there's bad cops. We know that there are things need to be done. What can we in this group right now start working on? Like when Kim Woods was talking about the legislation, how do we get that started? Andre? You're mute. Hold on. You're muted. Okay. You're muted. You're muted, Andre.
Okay, I did have a question going back probably about 15 minutes now. State's Attorney Neerheim, you were saying, I think it was asked, what can we do? And you were saying that, you need to keep promoting it and bring it up to your community leaders and raise the issue. My thing is, okay, once we do that, what's the next step?
In terms of I'm sorry, in terms of the licensure idea, or?
Well, just any idea in particular. Like if we have a idea that we really, strong, that we feel strongly about, and we want to get behind it. Okay, we brought it up, we're promoting it.
Got it.
Okay, talk to the community leaders. And then after that, then what's the next step to get this thing, get the ball rolling?
Well, I think, make sure we're following up and making sure community leaders are working with you on those ideas, that you hold them to what they say they're going to do. And if that's, whether it's a legislator that's going to say, okay, I'm going to help carry this piece of legislation, then you need to follow up and make sure they're actually doing it, and then support them in their effort to get the legislation passed. If it's an idea that comes forward about something I can do in my office, tell me about it. And if I don't do it, follow up with me and make sure I do it. If I'm, those of you that know me know if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. But make sure we're following up. And this isn't a one-time discussion. Nothing's going to be solved in this meeting. These are ideas that we're going to generate and that we have to make sure we follow up on. So yeah, that would be the main thing to do, is to follow up with those people and make sure they're doing what they say they're going to do. And if they say they're not going to do it, ask why, and push the issue.
So with that, Mike, what is it that we as a community can ask you to do to help us now?
Well, I think if there are ideas, in terms of what specifically my office, so I can't control the legislature. I can help you support legislation. I can help promote legislation. I am part of the State's Attorneys Association. So if there's legislation that the group as a whole is looking at, that's something I can certainly be involved in. But if it's something about my office, that, that's easy. That's what I can control pretty easily. And I don't have unions in my office. So if there's something that, whether it's personnel or whether it's a program or some sort of issue, let's make sure that we're keeping the lines of communication open. I want to hear those ideas. I want to hear any concerns. And I also want to do my best to try to share some of the programs we do have, because, for example, there's a program that I worked really hard to build with a group of people called the A Way Out. And that recognizes that a lot of people that get involved in the criminal justice system, really, if you go upstream of that, you realize that the sole reason for their involvement is either a mental health issue or a substance abuse issue. They're not bad people. There's an issue that they have in their life that leads them into criminal behavior and ultimately the system. So in recognizing that, we built this program where people could access help through the police 24/7, walk in, no questions asked, no arrest, and then they'll get access to treatment. And I knew when we built the program that the whole thing is contingent upon trust, upon getting somebody in the using community to trust the police. And I knew that even then, and that was a long time ago, it was before any of the stuff we're talking about now happened. But even then, I knew that was a huge issue in terms of getting people in the using community to walk into a police station at 2 a.m. and say, hey, here's my drugs. I don't want to do this anymore. Help me out, get me treatment. That's a big ask of people. Now, I'm proud to tell you that over 700 people in Lake County have done that. They've come in and they've gotten access to treatment. But with recent events, as Larnell said, we just took about a 30 or 40 year step backwards in terms of trust, and in particular when it comes to communities of color. So, I'm very interested in working with you guys to try to rebuild that trust. And, we've got good experiences where people have come in and gotten treatment and gotten a ride to treatment from a police officer and things like that without being arrested. And, those stories aren't always being told. And it's like anything, trust is very, very difficult to build and to earn, and it's very, very easy and quick to lose. So that's the challenge here.
Can you, you're not in Atlanta, can you give your thoughts on the situation that happened with Rayshard Brooks?
I really, at this point, I don't know enough to give my really educated opinion on that, because I haven't seen all the evidence. I've seen the video. I've seen what everybody else has said. I have the same feelings everybody else does who's seen that. But, as a prosecutor, I'm trained to not make an opinion until I see everything, all the video, all the evidence. And that's what I do in our cases here that I review. I wait till the end and on purpose, I won't even allow evidence to come to me piecemeal on police involved deaths. The entire case is done, and I look at everything, every video, every witness statement. I do those personally, and then I make the results of my review available to the public. So, you know, that's, you know, I don't want that to sound like a cop out, but I want to see everything. And I don't know Georgia law. I don't know, you know, I'm focused really right here in Lake County. I know Illinois law. I know our cases. I'm intimately familiar with all of them because I'm the one that reviews those. I don't put that off on my staff. I do that myself. And ultimately, I'm responsible for those decisions.
I look at the Atlanta situation, and I know, Mike, you're probably getting calls or emails from, you know, all over the county from different unions, police officers, and all of that stuff, asking you your opinion, just like Angela just asked about that. And I would imagine you're giving them the same answer.
Yeah.
But the thing is, and I'm sure they're calling you to see, for lack of a better phrase, are you going to back us up, being police officers? If that situation were in Lake County, would you charge that officer? Because what happens in the police world when things like that, and we see it, you know, with the work slowdown in Atlanta, with the officers calling in sick and all of that stuff, that's in favor of the officers. But me as a police officer, and I tell people this all the time, if you like being a police officer, you like being a police officer. So again, it comes back to that, the good cop. If you're a good police officer and you view what those officers did as wrong, you're going to come to work and you're going to do your job. You're not going to stand behind somebody that's bad. Because me personally, I always liked being a police officer. So no matter what I did, you know, the majority of my career was spent on specialized units. And there were times when, you know, supervisors would threaten me, well, if you don't do this, that, or the other, we're going to put you back on the road. Well, that's fine, you know, because I'm still a police officer. You can't take that away from me. But what I see happening a lot now is if they give you something, it's like, if I say, Mike, here's $100,000, you know, that's not free. There's something behind it. So a lot of times in the police world, you get a promotion, you get put on a specialized unit. A lot of times supervisors will use that against you. Well, if you don't do this, that, or the other, I'm going to put you back on the road. And if you don't have it within yourself, going back to, do you like being a police officer or do you not like being a police officer? And if you like being a police officer, you're not going to put yourself in that position to take a bribe within the police department, so to speak. And so it takes a lot within a person as an officer to say no to all of this stuff. And too often than not, it doesn't happen. You know, so it's just it's an interesting world, as I keep saying, in the police world.
Yeah, and I, to your point, I've been asked by a union in Lake County about, you know, their question was, you know, certainly not, are you going to back us? But it was,
right.
Has the law changed in Illinois as a result of this?
Well, and I'm sorry, because it was one thing that I did read was Graham versus Connor, was it?
Right.
That, so.
Right, and my response was very similar to the one I just gave. And again, I don't mean to sound wishy-washy because I'm not going to give an opinion on anything unless I have all the facts. But I did tell them that the law in Illinois has not changed. The law, my review is the same as it was before. You know, and if the facts support it, and these are all very factually driven decisions, and one fact could turn, you know, one way or the other, could completely change the outcome of a decision. But you know, the analysis remains the same in terms of the use of force law here in Illinois. The law remains the same. And if they act appropriately, then that will be the ruling. And if they don't, they'll be held accountable.
Mike, this has come up in a couple of chats. Have you recruited at the HBCUs at all?
Not specifically, no. I mean, I've supported the HBCU tours and I've supported that event, but I haven't personally gone to any of those schools and recruited from them. No.
Are you hiring somebody to do that?
I'd love to. Right now, with the Lake County's projecting a $50 million budget revenue shortfall. So right now, you know, they're talking about 20% reductions across the board, which for me, my budget is about 95% staff and salaries. So that's a lot of staff. So right now I'm fighting to keep the people that I actually have, much less try to bring on new staff. But there are certainly things we could do with the staff we have to promote. I mean, we don't have the finances to go out and hire, marketing firms or things like that. I wish we did. We just completely shredded all of our contractual and commodity budgets. So training, unfortunately, all that's been cut significantly just because of the situation that I'm facing with the budget shortfall. But I got a good staff here, and we'll make the best with the people we have. But really, right now, I'm just fighting to keep what I got and not lose staff positions. I have 5 positions that I've kept vacant that I'm not filling until I find out what happens with the budget situation, because I don't want to have to lay people off. And right now, I'll be lucky to just keep those positions vacant. So it's kind of a tough situation right now with regard to the budget, but we're all going through it. I mean, certainly everybody in the private sector is hurting as well. And these are just tough times.
Okay. Any other questions from the panel right now in relation to anything that Mike has said? Andre?
Yes, so let's just, going back to State's Attorney Neerheim, let's say the community leaders are just kind of like disinterested. We bring them issues and they kind of give us the runaround and we have to go over them. Is there, who can we go to if the community leaders aren't doing what they're supposed to do?
I think you find the community leaders that are, and you go to them and you support them. And if they're elected officials that aren't listening, then ultimately they're accountable to the electorate. And, that's who they're going to have to answer to. And I'm one of those people. So, if it's a community leader that's not elected and if they're kind of tone deaf or they're not willing to get active in this type of reform, then, I would imagine that pretty soon they're going to find themselves not being listened to and not being in leadership positions anymore. And then those that are going to rise up and be leaders. That's what leadership's all about. It's not necessarily a title. It's really about what you're doing. And people know who's real and who's not. People know who's just coming around now because of what's going on, and people that have been here all along. So I think, people just need to pay attention to that stuff and then get behind those that are real.
That's funny that you say that, because one of the things we kind of touched on it before, and I'm hoping that we'll probably maybe touch on it or talk more about it next week. But we were just talking about like the importance of voting, but voting, like even when we have a lot of people that are up for election and Mike, when I talked to you earlier, it was kind of like, okay, we vote, people come around when election time comes around, but then when it's time to actually act on all the things that they said they were going to do or that's expected of them, it doesn't always happen. And so even with that, looking for opportunities because even here, I mean, I've invited different politicians to come on here and it hasn't happened for whatever reason. I mean, could be very busy schedules. But the point being, this is your community right here talking, and that's why I appreciate you coming on, because we're saying this is what we want, or this is what we need, or this is what we're looking at. And the people that I think should hear it are not necessarily coming on to even have a voice here, but come election time, then, they'll be looking for votes at that point. So again, I thank you for coming on and even just having this conversation. And it's called having hard conversations because some of the questions may not be easy. Everybody's not going to be able to answer them, but at least coming on to hear what people have to say and try to figure out a way to either make change or share why it can't happen or what we can do. Because that's a big thing right now for me.
Yeah, and I don't want this to be our only conversation. I'm happy to come back anytime. I know you and I talked earlier about some other topics that are important to me and you. And also anybody on this panel or anybody listening, if they have questions that we're not able to get to, get them to me, I'll answer them. Look, I'm sitting in Waukegan right now. I was born and raised here. This is my community. So this is important to me. I know I'm a white male. I know I come at it from a different amount of privilege and a different lens that a lot of other people do, but this is still my community and I'm invested in it. So, I'm here to listen. That's a big part of why I wanted to come on this today, is to share some of my ideas and share some of what's going on, but really more importantly, to listen.
If there's no questions from the panel, I will try to hit some that are out there on Facebook right now. There was a question, who elects the union or how is the union organized? I think that's come through on our chat as well as on Facebook.
It's just within the police department.
Okay.
You know, just like any position, you know, they have the union president, the, you know, whatever amount of vice presidents, whatever the other offices are, you know, and make it known throughout the police department that I want to run for this position. They have elections at the union meeting and you get the votes and you're elected in. And then the thing too, as I said with unions before, that if something happens in Waukegan and it's successful with the union, and it's going to go all across the country, you know, because they're well, like I said, they're well organized, they're well funded, and they talk just like we're talking on here. You know, we have Mike here today, and I'm sure somebody's listening in, and they're going to hold Mike accountable for this in a negative way, you know, and all of this stuff. So, you know, but like you said earlier, this is an opportunity that many of us don't get to talk to the head of the state's attorney's office, whether you're the state's attorney, the district attorney, wherever jurisdiction you're in. This is rare, you know, on a platform like this. And for you, Angela, to reach out to other people and then not to come after so many invitations, you know, to me, it shows what they are made of and what they aren't made of. Because especially right now in the times that we're going through with all of this stuff, everybody, and I'm not talking about just because it's an election year, everybody, if they care about their community, whether they're actually in that community or not, they should be on a forum and not afraid to answer the questions and not get the questions in advance so they can make it polished, you know. And as I said with the other forum the other night, I appreciated the forum, listening to it and everything, but some of the answers that some people were giving, I was not impressed. Not impressed at all. And I know a lot of those people, the majority of those people I know, I was not impressed at all.
Okay, another Facebook question. I am all for police reform and putting laws in place for however long it takes. However, until that happens, what do we tell our children about protecting themselves? My son has had a gun held to his head by a Waukegan policeman while his brother watched in fear. Not the first time being harassed. My sons are angry. What do we tell them until they feel protected?
I think that's a hard question, and it's a process of just, and I can't say rebuilding because I don't know if the trust has ever been there completely in the Black, brown, you know, community. So it's a hard question, but I think it's going to take, and I think we had mentioned this before, community policing. And I know when I first started, at that time, it was Judge Bridges. He was the chief of police at that time. And one of his things was community policing. And it doesn't take much to get out of a squad car and know who your neighbors are within that community, rather, not your neighbors, but who you're patrolling, who's in the community, who's in that zone or that district, whatever it is where you're working, who's in there. If I see Andre walking down the street, you know, Andre, I'm Officer so-and-so. I'm going to be in this zone, you know, probably for the next 6 months. Here's my card. You know, you have any issues, you know, it's my cell phone number on here, call, you know, getting involved in the community. Angela, you may be having a picnic or something. You may need an officer there for security, you know, so contact me. Here's my number. I'll do it for free because I'm a part of the community. It's building those relationships where when we get out of the car as a police officer, we're not always getting out of the car to arrest somebody. There was a police officer years ago that I met. She was a lady in Racine, and a Black lady. She was an officer. She came up with this program. I forgot what the name of the program was. But one thing I noticed when I first started we were always doing search warrants. And we were always on the south side or the west side of Waukegan. And it was always kids in there. And I used to see the look in the faces. We hit the door, we bust in, we putting everybody on the ground. And those kids, you know, the fear that we instilled in those kids. Now we were doing what we were supposed to do, but still that's that fear. And so what this officer did in Racine, she came up with this program where in the back of her squad car, she was asking people to donate books. And so when she saw a kid on the street, she would strike up a conversation to give them a book. You know, it's innovative ways to break that us against them mentality down. And it can be done. I've seen it done. But like Mike said, now we've gone back maybe 30 years to where, and it's a fear that I completely understand. Because again, I grew up running from the police. But it's difficult, but it can be done. We got to get back to the community. And that goes back to having officers that have a vested interest in the community. You know, they're not from someplace else and they come into Waukegan, North Chicago, Zion, or wherever just to do the job. And then they get out, take their money and go someplace else and spend it.
You know, to piggyback on that, I mean, it's all about relationships, you know, and building that trust. And community policing is huge. When I was a kid in Waukegan, police officers they drive around, they give out baseball cards to kids. Couldn't have been a huge investment monetarily, but it made a big difference because if a Waukegan squad drove down the street, there'd be 15 kids on bikes chasing after that squad car. And that's, you know, that's unfortunately, sometimes in communities in Waukegan right now, it's going the opposite way. And but community policing is huge. I know Waukegan has a youth police academy where they bring in kids from Waukegan to go through a police academy course, which is a great way to help build those relationships. I've gone to those graduations. They actually have incorporated a mock trial portion towards the end to hopefully maybe inspire some of those kids to be prosecutors or defense attorneys. So, you know, I know there's some effort being made to try to build those bridges up with youth in Waukegan. Again, that police academy is a great idea, but little things can go a long way. You know, somebody brought up the other day, they asked whatever happened to the DARE program. And I know DARE gets criticized a lot from a education perspective in terms of its effectiveness in reducing substance abuse. But what DARE did do that I think is positive is you had police officers in those schools with kids at a young age, not from an enforcement standpoint, but just building those relationships. And the police were getting to know those kids, and those kids were getting to know those police officers. And that, you know, that had a lot of positive benefits that, you know, people are asking why that program went away. Why can't we bring programs like that back? And I know that's part of a bigger discussion right now about police officers in schools and their role as it relates to that. But really, if we're looking at this in terms of trying to build relationships and build trust, you know, those are ways to do it. And they've had some success in the past. Maybe not necessarily the way they were intended. I mean, DARE was intended as a drug education program, but I think it had other benefits that weren't intended that we should look at.
So it is, go ahead, Andre.
I have I have two questions for State's Attorney Nerheim. I actually typed it out because I didn't want to lose my train of thought. So my questions are you aware that white supremacists have infiltrated law enforcement on every level?
Yeah, I'm sure there's people with those viewpoints all over society. So I wouldn't be naive to think that they're not in law enforcement.
Okay, and my second question is there anything that can be done to weed them out before they cause harm to people in communities that they're not from?
Well, I think, you know, it shows why doing background checks is very important. And in those background checks, obviously, you know, you're not only just looking at criminal history, but social media and looking at some of the stances that people have taken in the past on their social media platforms. That's an effective way. I know that's something I do in my office. It's an effective way to kind of get to the heart of what people's viewpoints are. So if somebody's been, you know, if they were saying things negatively on social media or questionable, that's going to come out in a background check. It wouldn't come out in a criminal history check, but it would come out if you're really doing a proper background check. So trying to get to people's attitudes and their viewpoints, it has to be part of any kind of background check. Also, psychological testing needs to be part of that as well. And I know for most police departments it is, but you know, will hopefully root out some of this stuff as well.
Okay. All right. So it is 12:53. Again, as always, great conversation, but I want to ask this now while we are live. What is our next step? Because I don't want to go into week 4 and still be continuing to just have conversations.
I like the idea of going with starting the legislation of, you know, I don't know. I think that's where we're kind of split, because we started off with the immunity question, and then we started talking about whether we were going to go with legislation for holding other officers accountable if they know kind of whistleblowing type of thing. They lose their ability to police as well, and then having protection for them. So I like the ideal of going with the legislation of holding other police officers accountable. Reggie, you said there was something already that you read that's going on. I think you said in Oklahoma or something. So if we can just kind of look at that route, just to kind of see what they did and who was it, a private group like this, or was it attorneys, or was it officials, or who started that process? If we could do that, that would be my suggestion.
And I'm okay with this. So let me clarify. When I started off, it was just like, this is a starter. This is what I have been looking into, but I am so for like working on the legislation. So I just want to say that this is not a just me conversation. That's why I've invited you all to participate. So I don't pretend to have all the answers. So I appreciate that, Kim, because, and even when Patricia said it, it's like, that's a second step. What's the first step? Like, I appreciate you all saying that, because I don't have all the answers. That's why I've invited you all to the table to see what we could do. It's not a me thing, because me by myself, I just don't, I couldn't do it. But with everybody in place, and I think all of us are for the most part on the same page of knowing that I think we're all on the page of knowing something needs to be done. It's just the figuring out the what and the how. So I'm all for the legislation piece. I am. I just don't know how to get that started.
Will a petition help with get anything started with legislation, or is that kind of a no go? I mean, if we did a petition, like we started talking about it with the immunity thing, but if we did a petition, going towards the legislation piece of it, would that be helpful? Would something like that possibly work?
I think so. I mean, I think if certainly there'd have to be an identified specific piece of legislation that you're promoting, or a specific idea, and then if you had X number of signatures supporting that, that's going to help. I would hope that's going to help get the attention of whatever legislator. But I think all of us on this call have relationships with lawmakers. I know we're not all in Lake County, but various lawmakers, and I think sometimes it's as simple as just sitting down with them one-on-one, promoting the idea, get their feedback, and then that the signatures come in to help support them in moving that forward. So
I don't want to assume, does everyone on the call have a relationship with a lawmaker? If so, raise your hand. So that is why that's why, like, you coming on, Tory, Attorney Newsom coming on last week, that's why that's important, because even last week when he shared some things, it's like everybody wasn't there, and so that's why, that's why, again, I appreciate, we now have a relationship with you. But we have to get to that point, and I think that's where the challenge kind of comes in a little bit.
I think, Angela, I'm sorry. I think, I guess my thing would define the word relationship, because there are elected officials and, lawmakers, people that I come in contact with. I know Mike even knows just from working for, the township. So, and I'm in contact with them. Depending on when you say relationship, I don't go to Mike's house and eat dinner.
I'm not asking that.
Welcome anytime.
Can I email or can I call certain people? Yes. That type of relationship, yes. But it would take the group coming together to put together what we want to say when that dialogue is open. And that would be something that I would be willing to do, just from the people that I know.
Thank you.
Yeah, me too. I'd be happy to help facilitate any discussions with them.
Okay. So I'm going to put in, and Mike, I'll add you to our personal chat, some information, and then I want you all to respond to that so that we can work together to, get something on the table, because right now, again, the way that I explained this to Mike earlier was, we go to a conference, right? Conference is amazing, we're on fire, and then a week or two later, we're done. I just don't want to see that. I'm struggling with even now, and this is just a personal thing, but the people that went out and started protesting initially, and I'm not saying everybody, but I'm just saying, we're on fire for the cause, right? But now we're seeing we're seeing some people who are protesting for the cause, but it doesn't look anything like it. It's like they're making money from it, or they're making, it's just not about what the real issue is. And that kind of stuff is bothering me. So I want this to be something that's very effective. I guess that's the only way that I can put it. It is 12:59. I just want to read what Freddie put in the chat. He said, just to clarify, my reason for bringing up Breonna Taylor was simply to ask, what can we do to make sure that something does happen? They named a law after her, yet there's still no action on her case. So I just want to know what we can do to change that, because we can't just say it didn't work for her and focus on other things. She deserves a solution too. That's all I was saying. Okay. So I want to say thank you to everybody that's on our panel. I want to say thank you to everyone who was on Facebook, everyone that did a watch party. I really, really appreciate it. I hope this conversation has been helpful. Mike, again, thank you for coming on. We will be, I'm sure, contacting you again soon. Kim, we are all going to chat offline, because I do think we need to do something, and that would make my heart feel so much better, knowing that we moved in a direction that's going to be helpful. All right. So thank you guys. And again, thank you guys. This has been 3 weeks straight, and some of you have been on here every week for 2 hours. So I appreciate you all so much. All right. See you next week. Talk to you in the chat. Thank you. Bye. Bye, Facebook.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.